Welcome to the Infomullet YouTube channel. If you enjoy this content, please like or share. And if you'd like to support the Infomullet by becoming a mulleteer, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate your support. And for those who don't know, when we talk about government shutdown, a quick TLDR on the process. Every year, the government fiscal year operates from October 1st through September, end of September. So the fiscal year for the government actually started last October 1st, fiscal year 2021. Congress has about 5 to 8 major appropriations bills they have to approve before the fiscal year starts, or there's going to be a partial government shutdown. Now, there's something they can do called a continuing resolution, which kind of kicks the can. A continuing resolution is a short-term measure that basically says everything stays as it was last year. So if you think about this, we were in fiscal year 2020 up through the end of September. And during that time, Congress passed all of the spending bills they needed to, but one. And the one they weren't able to agree on is the National Defense Authorization Act, called the NDAA. And this is the largest appropriation bill. This is where, because these bills are not tied to one specific cabinet or agency. So the National Defense Authorization Act isn't just the Department of Defense, though it includes that. It's a lot of other stuff. And this is a gigantic bill, and this one they couldn't pass. So what they did is, to avoid a government shutdown at the end of September, they passed a continuing resolution that expires on December 11th. What that means is, if Congress doesn't pass an NDAA or another continuing resolution by December 11th, the government will go into a partial shutdown. And this has been kind of overlooked because obviously in November we had the presidential election, and then we had second election, and then we had mid-elections, and then we had afternoon elections, and then we had thirdsies. And I think Giuliani's still going back to the buffet table for extra helpings on that election. But we've had a lot of elections. They've all gone for Biden. But we're finally getting to the point where the elections are over and we're kind of moving on a little bit. And so all this attention and oxygen have been pulled out of the room. Anything that was left, obviously the coronavirus wave 2. I've talked about that before. We had the massive surge going into Thanksgiving week. I think it's going to look low during Thanksgiving week because of artificial testing depression, but by the end of this week, we're probably going to be back up to record highs, maybe over 3,000 deaths a day. That's valid, but I don't think we can lose sight that there's only a few days left for Congress to get their act together. If you think about this, the House of Representatives, so a spending bill has to be passed by both the House and the Senate. The House of Representatives have 9 days in session left, and the Senate has 14 days before they break for the new year. So this is all days left in the December before they go on winter break. 9 for the House, 14 for the Senate. And in that period of time, they've got to pass the National Defense Authorization Act before December 11th and any COVID stimulus if it's going to happen at all. Well, what's happened, I'm going to start with the shutdown risk. It looks like there's some consensus that can be worked out on NDAA. One of the great things about defense is that people tend to come together and bipartisan sort of agree to spend a lot of money on things that are only marginally useful and generally annoying, but at the end of the day, it gets passed. But there's 2 hiccups here, in that there's outstanding veto threats that President Trump has issued. And the first one was issued over the summer, which is what held this up in the first place. He said because in the Defense Act, if you remember the concern about Confederate statues and Confederate legacy, there's a provision in the National Defense Authorization Act that will strip Confederate names of Confederate generals from current military bases. Not going to get into whether that's a right or wrong issue. I think the Republican version has it happen over a period of time. The Democrat version has it happen much sooner. But Trump threatened to veto if that provision was contained in there. Since then, he's lost the election. And he's lost the election, and he blames in part Facebook. So a new veto threat has emerged, which to me is much more serious than the Confederate veto threat. That always seemed like window dressing to me. But what's happened is Trump, who has lost the election now, is saying if Section 230 is not repealed or replaced or significantly amended, he's going to veto the defense authorization. And this isn't just like base names. If you look in the links down below, there's a 30-minute backgrounder on Section 230, because I saw this coming in August, over the summer. I think it was August, and I did a long video of a backgrounder. Section 230 is the part of the Internet Communications Act that protects social media from being sued for libel for third-party content. I'm not going to go into that. It's very detailed, but the TLDR is that if you are a platform provider or any sort of social media provider, you cannot be sued for the content that other people put on. So for example, you're all putting comments up on this. I'm the Infomullet. You're putting comments on my page. I can be sued for what I say or what Bonky does because, you know, but I can't be sued for what, you know, Ed might say, hypothetically, or Ken or Valeria or any of those folks like that. So the Section 230 has a really bedrock, and it's being targeted by both Democrats and Republicans. Neither of them are happy with it. But Trump has issued a veto threat that says if you don't repeal or replace this in the next few days, I'm going to veto, and there's a big question of whether there's enough support in Congress to overcome a presidential veto. If they pass this spending bill and he vetoes it, they've got to come back and not just hit a majority, but a supermajority now. And the Democrats have responded to this veto threat with no way. We're not going to negotiate Section 230 from a lame duck president under this kind of threat in this kind of short term. And this sets up a real risk that I think has been missed with everything else going on, that we now have 9 days until there's a partial government shutdown. And the challenge here is you look at where President Trump's at now. The guy's not in a good space, right? He's had a bad month, bad year maybe. He's just lost the presidency. His own attorney general just threw him under the bus with his whole gambit. His legal team can't spell or submit lawsuits. It's been rough for President Trump. I know there's not a lot of sympathy, doesn't necessarily need to be, but he's not in a good space. However, if the government shuts down on December 11th, partial shutdown, not full shutdown, partial shutdown, there's a very real probability that the government would stay shut down until January 20th, which is inauguration. That would make it the longest government shutdown in history. The longest currently, the record is 35 days. That was over 2018 through 2019. I covered it on the Infomullet at the time. That was over funding for the border wall. And it's a real possibility that if there is a shutdown and Trump's doing this as some sort of like last saving grace, because remember, right now the Section 230 is just the only thing that's out there. Trump could do something about the election. He could want credit for vaccines. He could throw a lot of monkey wrenches into the spending bill and use it as a threat to shut down the government. Now, that shutdown, if it happens, last time we saw this happen, we saw the Democrats go to their corner, the president go to his corner, and the Senate Republicans go to their corner. They didn't even talk for a good month. So if the shutdown does happen, it may last all the way through inauguration, which would be completely unprecedented to inaugurate a president during a partial government shutdown. And obviously, this can't come at a worse time when we're dealing with the wave 2 cresting spike here. And so if there's any questions on that, I'll go ahead and take that. Then I'll go into the stimulus discussion. So this isn't the only thing that Congress has to face. I'll jump into stimulus real quick, then we'll get to the forecast. The stimulus negotiations is the CARES Act ends December 26th. And a lot of the provisions have already ended, but there's 2 key provisions that have a cutoff date on December 26th. And so in addition to negotiating this Defense Appropriation Act, there's a separate stimulus act that either has been delayed for months now. And the 2 provisions that are going to fall off is the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, the PUA. This is 39 weeks for business owners, self-employed, or independent contractors, basically people who would fall through the normal cracks of unemployment. As of October 31st, there's about 9 million people receiving this. If nothing gets passed December 26th, that stops. They're out of it. The second big provision that comes up as an expiration on December 26th is the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation, PEUC. This is 13 weeks of additional unemployment after they've already expended the existing state unemployment. I think the existing state is 26. This takes it up to 39, or maybe it's 13 and 26. But both of these are set to expire. And there's about 4.5 million people on that one. So people who have watched us have known that these stimulus discussions have pretty much gone on since the original CARES Act was passed last March and April. There's 3 proposals out there right now, 2 of which are probably non-starters, and 1 of which is a compromise but has been shot down. So let's go through real quickly. The McConnell version pause for the cheering of my McConnell fan club. I need a t-shirt about McConnell fan club. But anyways, the McConnell version is the only thing that has failed more than the McConnell version of the Stimulus Act is President Trump's election lawsuits. McConnell's version, it's a very narrow version. It does a 1-month extension of both of those unemployment programs I just described. And basically what it does is it says if you're already in it, you get 3 months to phase out, and we cut off new people after a month. So it's a very limited extension. They're going to do a second round of PPE, try and tailor it more to small business to say, look, you got to be under small business sizing limits or 300 employees, and even do a set aside for ultra small business, 10 employees or less. They're doing educational support, but that's kind of some very limited state grants. It's really more tax credits for educational savings and expansion of 529 payment. That's not really stimulus. It's kind of more of a tax policy. It's not very effective in times of crisis for deploying resources because it's a tax credit. And then 105 billion to the states to get students back in school. So there's also a restaurant provision in there. They're trying to improve business at restaurants because clearly what we need is more people in the restaurant getting sick with COVID. But that increases the business meal deduction 100%. And there's a charity increase. So there's a lot of tax provisions. I think the only real stimulus you could say is a strategic supplies statement where they're going to stockpile PPE, vaccine. There's money for that. So that's kind of a manufacturing stimulus. That one, no one seems to support. Even McConnell runs the Senate, can't even get GOP support for it in the Senate. The second proposal is the Democrats one, which is, so that's Goldilocks, right? If that's Goldilocks, that's way too small. That's the littlest stimulus. The largest stimulus is still the House Democrats, Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats. They have gone back and continually revised this. It's moved from $2 trillion. The president has said he'll never sign that. They're down to about $1 trillion now. And it's basically everything I just described, more, plus hospital funding, more state support, and a stimulus check. That's the key thing. The McConnell provision does not include a stimulus check. The House Democrat one would, but that's about $1 trillion, over $1 trillion. McConnell signaled that as DOA. The third has just come out in the last 24 hours. This is a bipartisan group. I think Senator Romney's involved. There's a few House Democrats, Senate Democrats, and it's kind of like the middle Goldilocks, right? It does 4 months extra for everyone, PUA and PUC, those unemployment extensions. So it extends it for 4 months, doesn't have a phase out. It puts forgivable loans for small business. It does support for vaccine. It does more PPE, but it doesn't have a stimulus check. So I think the big differences between these three is the Democrat version in the House, which is fairly large and relatively speaking, has all the support, that's being described, plus the stimulus check. The McConnell has the least, no stimulus check, and the bipartisan one is in the middle. And they, like I said, they got 9 days and 14 days to sign this before they go on winter break. So it'll be interesting to see. It's going to be a very tense time in Congress to negotiate these, and these have real impacts. The states need the support to deploy the vaccines that we're all hearing about. They've needed the support just to cope with current pandemic situations. We're going to have more and more cases coming up that is exacerbated by the inability to have kids home from school, who's providing daycare, essential support. I mean, this whole thing is interlocked with the state of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think looking at Republican strategy, they were kind of thinking this would magically go away and they could push it off, and because everything expires in December 26. Well, we're now going to have an expiration right in the peak of wave 2 or the aftermath of wave 2, depending on when it crests. So here's a question. Let's see. Oh, lots of good. So let me say hi to some folks. Valeria, Christy, Albert, Ken, Celia, Laura. Everyone's asking for autographed Bonky photos. We can figure that out. There's stickers. If you go on the store, there are stickers of Bonky. It's the Dr. Falconberry Bonky logo. I can also try and get a photo of the live Bonky. We both Miss Falconberry did a great job of animating us. So the animated Bonky is a little different from that, but we do have stickers like that on the store. Question, Ishmael, what parts of the government would be shut down on 11/12 December? So Ishmael, the way government shutdowns work, partial shutdowns, and these I say partial because normally about 76% of the government stays open. But OMB has an authority to identify which parts of the government stay open and which don't based on mission essential. And basically every department and every agency has to submit who are mission essential personnel. Mission essential means safety, welfare, security, mission critical infrastructure, things like that. And again, so in the past, what often happens during shutdown is OMB will issue instructions to the agencies to tell us who is essential or not. This creates a big area of uncertainty that if Trump appointees want to put the screw job on an incoming Biden administration, they can really come back and say very few people are essential. I don't think they'll do that to extent, but in the past, what we've seen is, first of all, non-essential DOD personnel, and if you're DOD, you probably know if you're essential or non-essential. Non-essential have traditionally been furloughed. If you're a government employee, that furlough means you're not paid, but you will be paid back. If you're a contractor, like myself, you simply don't, it depends on the contract, but generally you don't get paid, and you don't get paid back for the time you miss. If you're a vendor or something like that, and obviously like working in a cafeteria, those facilities get shut down, you do it. The ripple effects can be quite large, but I want to be clear here that partial government shutdown generally means about 76% of the government remains open, or at least the spending levels do, and about 25% are actively shut down and furloughed. And national parks always get hit, and given the resistance to Trump, I don't think they're going to be spared. Other questions. Laura has said, McConnell has said he wants COVID in the NDAA as it's a very skinny stimulus and hinges on companies not having liability for COVID employees. I think that is a bigger threat to the shutdown. Have said, yeah, so what you can do, there's a term you're going to hear called omnibus. An omnibus bill is when you combine multiple spending bills into one. And it's kind of like everything in the kitchen sink. It is certainly possible and legal for the NDAA, this National Defense Authorization Act. Remember, I said it doesn't have to be just national security and defense. They could pass a joint omnibus bill that includes COVID-19 stimulus and the NDAA all in one bill. The problem is the gatekeeper on that, as Laura mentioned, is McConnell. And his provisions, he wants liability protection for businesses and schools. And the Democrats have said that's non-starter. So one of the challenges of omnibus, one of the reasons you do an omnibus is everything, it has to be passed. So you throw everything in and everyone kind of grits their teeth and signs off on it. The problem with an omnibus is if someone is a stickler on one of those provisions, they may have passed the NDAA on what's called a clean resolution, a clean slate. You're just doing the NDAA and they can deal with stimulus separately. Once you combine them, you run the risk of the complication. Now, in normal times, I don't think that'd be too much of a risk, but these are not normal times. And I think the first thing is getting something navigated through that the House and the Senate can agree upon. And then if the president vetoes that, like after all these negotiations, the president vetoes that because it doesn't have a Section 230. There is no way you want to do a Section 230 change unless it was simply a unenforceable resolution that said, you know, hear ye, on behalf of the outgoing President Trump, we have changed Section 230 to be 230 previously known as Section 230, you know, something like a title only. Trump vetoes something like that, you got a real mess on your hands, because then you get into the press back and forth, the feedback effect. Mike says his county's going back to hybrid learning, 2 days on school ground, 3 days online learning. Yeah, contractors get furloughed with no back pay. It does depend on the contract, but most contracts will not do it. And then this is Lisa and limited unemployment. I feel your pain, Lisa. I run a small consulting firm. We often do a lot of federal contracting work, especially with the DoD. We get hammered every time there's a government shutdown. Yeah, and the payroll, Rory's mentioning the federal employees had payroll taxes deferred until January 2020. That's another thing because they'll have to pay up. The deferment was not a waiver, it's a deferment, so they'll have to pay the outstanding payroll taxes in January 2021. Yeah, Lucas is mentioning about the Confederate generals. I think, Lucas, what I saw looking at this morning is he's backed away from the Confederate generals, which I always thought was more symbolic than anything else, and really pushed in the Section 230. That's the one he wants to, I think, put his legacy on. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to follow the Infomullet, visit us on Facebook or Twitter. And if you'd like notifications when we post new video content, click on the red subscribe button below the video. If you've ever wanted to become a mulleteer and support the Infomullet, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate the support.